Welcome, everyone.
I'm imagining folks can see it on their screens, but yeah, I can also sort of narrate that we're encouraging everyone to update your Zoom information to show your pronouns, your location, and we'd love to know a little bit more about everybody as well. So, drop in the chat what organization you're coming to us from. Also, maybe a little bit about what brings you here today. We're very, very curious and very grateful about who we have with us and what brings you here.
What an amazing group.
All right, so welcome everybody. So this is, if you are at this correct link, then you're in the correct webinar. So today we'll be speaking about social care and social co-ops, brought to you by a few of our good friends, by Ownership Matters. So that's Elias Krim, who'll give a brief introduction here in a moment. We also have partners with Shareable, as well as the New America Foundation, as well as the Zebras Unite, are all kind of our collaborators for this webinar here today. We're, again, so grateful that you're here with us. I'm Matthew Epperson. I'm in Athens, Georgia, as my name indicates, coming to you from unceded territory of the Muskogee and Eastern Cherokee tribe in Northeast Georgia. And I'm with Savvy Cooperative and also an active collaborator with the Ownership Matters newsletter. We're very active in the Start.coop community and others with the sort of platform co-op space. So we're very, very excited to be with you here today. All right, over to you, Rebecca.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. My name is Rebecca Matthew. I'm a professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Georgia that's been deeply interested in social care for about 15 years now. So I am just really honored and delighted to be sharing this space with everybody. So we just wanted to begin by giving you a little bit of an overview. So we're going to begin after we stop talking and chatting. We're going to go ahead and go to Elizabeth Garlow with New America to provide a brief introduction. Then we'll be inviting two esteemed guests to talk about the larger social care landscape and storytelling. How and in what ways is this relevant to each and every one of us? I saw in the chat Elizabeth Garlow talking about, I'm really concerned about care. I have a 15-month-old. I'm thinking about my parents. I'm thinking about the earth. These may be many things that resonate deeply with us. So we're going to be looking to Khye Tyson with the Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center and Susan Robinson with the Oregon Memorial Association to provide and invite us all to think about that larger caring landscape. After which Matthew and I will talk a little bit about social co-ops. We know there are some of the preeminent, not only scholars, but people doing this work in the audience today. So we invite people to engage in this collaborative conversation. Then we'll invite a few of our guests to provide reflections on that, given many of them decades of work in this sector. After which we hope everybody will be really primed to engage in some thoughtful conversation about that with some breakout conversations. And then we'll bring it back to Elias for our closing and invitation to the third segment of these webinar series. So before I kind of move, welcome Elizabeth, and I think Elias might provide a brief introduction to Elizabeth, I invite everybody to put yourselves on mute right now if you can, just so we can hear the folks that are speaking. Okay, so Elias, I'm gonna turn it to you.
Sure. Okay. Hi, Elias Krim, he, him pronouns. I'm on Potawatomi land in South Bend, Indiana. I'm the editor of Ownership Matters. A few months ago, I was reading a book by John Restakis, who I'm happy to say is in the room today, and was talking to my friend Elizabeth Garlow about a book she was reading by Hilary Cottam, and the topic was social care. And this sort of spawned an idea of getting people together both from the policy side and the practitioner side. And the event today is what we came up with. We're pretty energized about the group, and thank you all for coming. Elizabeth.
Great. Thanks, Elias. What an amazing group we have gathered here today. I just wanted to note this is kind of part 2 of a 3-part series that Elias and I have been working on this theme of good work and trying to bring together folks who are embodying the praxis of good work in new kinds of structures, new ideas, new ways of gathering and creating shared containers for good work. And we wanted to hone in on this theme of social care and care in general today. I've really been looking forward to this conversation, as I had shared in the chat, for one reason, because I, like many of you, I imagine, am navigating care on so many levels at this moment in time. Care for my baby, care for my elders and the elders in my life, care for my neighbors, my community. And it often feels like the structures and systems that are set up to try and uphold and support those are failing me. And I often pause and ask myself, what does it mean to be fully human at this moment in time as someone who wants to be receiving and giving care? That is fundamental to my humanity. It's fundamental to becoming who I seek to become in my life. And so I'm currently a fellow at New America. I've been doing some policy research. We're a policy research and action group based in DC, but with folks distributed across the country in communities. And we've been looking a lot at this question of care and care infrastructure. And when immersed in that topic, scarcity shows up a lot. The ways that accessing care in today's society can be challenging, especially for infants and toddlers. I think many of us have seen so many stories in the media about the ways that the United States was facing a childcare crisis before the pandemic began, and certainly the ongoing health and economic impacts of this public health crisis have kind of brought the child sector to the brink of collapse. Affordability of care comes up a lot too. Policymakers will talk about the fact that as many as 70% of us will need long-term services and supports, but most aren't prepared to pay for the options that are currently available to use today. And this is set against the backdrop of living in a country where we clearly place very little value on our ability to care for the most vulnerable, whether that be infants or aging parents or loved ones. The US is the only advanced economy today without a guarantee of paid maternity leave, and it's one of few without paid paternity, parental sick, or family caregiving leave. And voluntary paid family leave policies, I think, just cover a little over 20% of today's workforce. So this is, I think, what many people are kind of trying to shed light on today when we talk about this crisis of care. And I would say that many are quick to jump to solutions to address these gaps that, from my perspective, really focus on the commodification of care as a way of making it more accessible. And I find that somewhat troubling. And it's part of what really was kind of motivating this conversation today. My colleague Anne-Marie Slaughter, who's the CEO of New America, alongside Hilary Cottam, who Elias mentioned earlier, she's a designer in the UK, the author of a book called Radical Help. They have written quite a bit, emphasizing the need to think about caregiving less as a bundle of services and more as a web of relationships that can encourage human flourishing. So if we were to understand care as relationship and as part of this universal human experience that we value, then I feel like we should proceed pretty thoughtfully when it comes to how we best support the present and future of care in our society. And I feel like we can begin by acknowledging the ways that care work, the provision of care, has been invaluable and indispensable as long as humanity has been in existence. And yet our current economic structures and practices do not really uphold that. And I think this is part of why we're seeing this reality of, care jobs are among the fastest growing professions, but with huge predicted shortages, in large part because these haven't been good jobs. They haven't been valued. So a reflection that I just wanted to share as we kick off today is that I'm not sure we will solve the problem of scarcity of care with our current system, because our current system is designed to generate endlessly this feeling of more scarcity within us. I think this scarcity mindset that is so characteristic of our current neoliberal economic paradigm is one of the reasons that so many of us are calling for a rethink on the purpose of the economy. And I'm coming to today's conversation with this desire to put on this kind of mindset of abundance and imagination around questions like, what is care and how does it show up in our lives? What if we began our meetings, our encounters with one another, not by the typical question of, what do you do, but instead, who or what is in your care? And what if instead of thinking about care as a service, we thought about it as a relationship that is based in human connection? So these are some of the questions that I think many of us have been wrestling with. And if we really truly value care, then let's think about the structural containers we need to hold it and to honor it, and how we can go about designing those enterprises and those economic structures in more bold and visionary ways. So I'm very excited, and I will turn it back to our hosts for the upcoming conversations. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's honored to be with you, and really appreciate that context. That's, I think, in many ways paints the picture of what our guests will be offering here. So with that, and without any further ado, I will kick us over to our introductions of our speakers. So first up today, we have I have the pleasure of introducing my dear friend Khye Tyson with the Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center. So Khye is an unapologetic Southern queer Black femme who enjoys yoga, building community, laughing, subverting the gender binary, and reminding people that they can fire their doctors. Very important note. Khye is a sacred transition guide, entrepreneur, healer, consultant, and educator. Khye is the founder of the Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center, which was founded in 2018. Khye works toward a world in which Black women and femmes can live, thrive, and raise healthy families freely within a healthy community. Khye loves to hike, to sew, thrift, create art, sing, and dream in a world in which education is intuitive and culturally responsive. They're originally from Nashville, Tennessee, and currently reside in Atlanta. So it's my pleasure to introduce Khye Tyson.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm really excited to be here. I'm grateful for this conversation. I'll just take a few minutes to talk about Kuluntu and some of the work that we do related to this care economy and social care framework. So like Matthew said, thank you for introducing me. Kuluntu was founded in 2018. So I became a doula and a childbirth educator in 2018. And I started to realize quickly that there was there were a lot of people becoming doulas, but there wasn't really a community connection to doulas yet in a lot of different environments. And so I was realizing that even though I knew a lot of people who were doulas, they were struggling to find clients. They were struggling to find people who understood the value of a birth worker, of a doula, so that they could get paid and take care of their families and continue their business. And so I was in this space and I was like, there's not really anywhere for people to gather and to talk about birth as a community. And so I started putting on events and really gathering people together to have conversations about the transition that is birth. And then I started to have more conversations with birth workers and just birth workers and not pregnant people as much, but really talking to them about what makes it hard for you to do your job, what makes it hard for you to make a living doing this. Like a lot of people are called to birth work. A lot of people feel very passionate about it, but that doesn't always translate to being able to make a living and provide for your family. And birth work it can be long work, it can be isolating work, it can be exhausting, it can be traumatizing. That's not something that you want to do alone. And so as I'm learning and I'm meeting more birth workers and talking to more birth workers, I'm realizing that a lot of us are just kind of out here winging it, which is, most humans at any given point in time. But I thought there was a space, I thought there needed to be a space for birth workers to refine our craft and for us to learn from each other and for us to support each other so that this wave of birth workers, that this wave of response to the maternal mortality crisis isn't just a blip on the radar. That birth workers are building sustainable businesses so that they can take care of themselves and their families so that in 5-10 years, they're not burnt out, which is what we're seeing from kind of the first wave of doulas who became doulas maybe in like the early 2010s, a lot of them are burnt out right now. And so then the newer wave of doulas is just replacing them instead of adding to, if that makes sense. And so we're really losing that longevity in the field if people are burnt out and not able to make a living. We're losing that knowledge, whether that's indigenous knowledge, ancestral knowledge, knowledge of different systems and different providers. And we're losing the opportunity to collectively organize. I think looking wider to the maternal mortality crisis, birth workers have an opportunity to, whether it's passing legislation, whether it's protesting and petitions and public records requests and whatever we need to do to shine light on the issues and the problems that are happening, we can do that collectively. And that's, again, this is very isolating work. So while we're actually doing, in the hospital with our clients, or we're reaching out to people, that can be so, it's just you. And a lot of people are entrepreneurs, they're working by themselves. And so getting together also gives us that space to realize, hey, this is, I know Dr. X who treated my client this certain way, and I know Dr. Y who treated my client this other certain way. And we're missing out on creating that network of safe provider versus who is an unsafe provider, and different things like that. And so, yeah, once the pandemic started, we pivoted to a lot of things being online, but I still wanted to keep those conversations going around how are we sharing knowledge, how are we collectively organizing, even if we're not necessarily in a co-op. And so we had some webinars talking about how to serve very niche populations. I shouldn't say niche, they're not actually niche, more like marginalized populations. So we talked about serving plus size pregnant folks, plus size families, serving LGBTQ families, serving these very particular groups that have not just particular needs, but also there's marginalization and there's harm that's being caused to these groups as well. And so I'm always looking to push forward the conversation of how are we caring for the most marginalized, the most harmed in these systems, because yes, we can say that, Black people and Indigenous folks are dying in the maternal mortality crisis, but if we drill down, there's a lot of nuance that we're missing out on if we don't drill down. And so we know that there's fat phobia in the medical system, in addition to racism, in addition to sexism, in addition to homophobia and transphobia. So understanding how the intersectionality affects our clients ultimately helps us be better advocates for them in the face of the maternal mortality crisis. So I say all that to say that that's one of the big things that we do with Kuluntu is we work with birth workers to have these conversations, whether it's we're learning something educational or we're just having a discussion about a certain topic. Also, and I also started a mentorship program last year for newer birth workers to start thinking about these conversations at the beginning of their careers instead of kind of trying to retrofit it in later. On the flip side, we still provide direct services to families. So doula and childbirth education services, a lot of that has been virtual in the past 2 years. And then also training and consulting with organizations that work with birthing families around best practices and around the maternal mortality crisis, as well as this is where my healer side comes in, really working with these organizations to heal the healers or to help the helpers, because a lot of times social workers, case managers, doctors, nurses, a lot of these healthcare providers and service providers are burnt out. A lot of healers and helpers are burnt out. And I'm sure a lot of y'all can relate that we are exhausted, especially in the pandemic. And so I'm always reminding people that we have to heal the healers. We have to check on our strong friends. We have to, especially if you're in an organization, invest in your employees and invest in your staff when they're going above and beyond. In a lot of nonprofits and social agencies, we know that the people who work there, they have the heart for it. They're not doing it for the money. We love that line. We're not doing it for the money, but people do deserve to feel healed and whole and not burnt out. And, I see the same thing in social work, in teaching, in nursing. People are burnt out because of that secondary trauma. They're burnt out because of the amount of emotional and physical labor that healing and helping and caring, that toll that it takes on them. And we really need to invest in those healers, those helpers, those care professionals, so that we still have them around in 5, 10, 20 years. What would life look like if we didn't have home health aides, right? What would life look like if we didn't have childcare providers? I was a childcare provider, God bless, especially the preschool. God bless, because like childcare providers do not make enough money, especially if you're not a teacher or a certified teacher. Teachers and just so many healers and helpers, social workers, even nurses are underpaid, underappreciated, underutilized. And we're seeing this great resignation. I would venture to say, once we shake out the numbers, that the vast majority of those people who resigned were in pink collar jobs, were in the service sector. I would venture to say, because just seeing what the conversation around restaurants and the restaurant industry, and their people are not having it anymore. And a lot of that, I think this society, we just dismiss, I guess, the service sector and education and the emotional labor and even, stay-at-home parenting. Like, we dismiss and we devalue those things, and it shows, and people are feeling it, and people are tired of it. And I think that's a big part of the work that we need to do, is refocusing on healing the healers and helping the helpers. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Khye. I really appreciate that. And I just wanted to highlight a few things. And I think that in many ways it dovetails with Elizabeth's introduction too. You're really painting this landscape, one that, particularly for those involved in the caring sector, is really what has come to define that is poverty level wages, isolation, right? High levels of burnout, high levels of turnover. We see decrease, again, with the privatization of these services, decreases in job satisfaction, decreases in implications with respect to quality. So what we hear with Khye is we're seeing this attention and awareness of this, and also this identification of what are the structures that need to be in place to ensure the flourishing of us individually and collectively, as all of us are care providers and recipients. And I think we'll hear from John Restakis later, thinking about what is the role, what is the organizational structure, and this is critically important, what is the role of the state in providing resources, training, et cetera, to facilitate that? Khye, I heard you mention several times that you're kind of out there. You're kind of out there. And there is this disconnection. So is there a role of, and what is the role of how do we weave these together with respect to organizational structures, state support, et cetera? Because we don't want there to be this, oh, well, Khye and Kuluntu, they've got it. We're gonna trust that they have this. We need to ensure responsibility in order to really build this and to reweave that social fabric. So with that, I want to turn it back to Matthew to introduce our second honored guest. Thanks, Khye.
All right, thank you so much, Rebecca. And yeah, thank you so much, Khye. That was incredible. I feel very deeply touched by what you just shared. So thank you. Being the spouse of a clinical social worker who offers mental health services, I absolutely see what you're saying and see it on the daily of like how it is easy to neglect those who provide care, and how we need to care for the carers, and like just how absolutely essential that is. So thank you so much for lifting that up. And so, yeah, as Rebecca mentioned, I'm going to move us toward our second speaker now. And so let's see here. And I will present. There we go. All right, so it's also my honor and privilege to introduce to you Susan Robinson, coming to us with the Oregon Memorial Association, who will be our second speaker today. So Susan is a native Oregonian and is returning after 42 years in South Carolina. She's raised 3 children and has pursued her career in South Carolina. She is currently bi-coastal, so she spends most of her time in Oregon, but she's also helping her son and daughter-in-law in Oregon, raising 2 grandchildren. Susan worked full-time in aging, hospice, volunteer administration, and other human services, earned her MSW from the University of South Carolina, graduated with a certificate in gerontology well into her career. Her board and volunteer experience has included 7 years with the board of the Funeral Consumers Alliance of South Carolina, which is also a cooperative organization for those who might not be familiar with it, past president of the Planned Parenthood of Central South Carolina, and as well as serving on the board of the local Habitat for Humanity chapter. She served on the South Carolina Governor's Task Force of Volunteerism and was a founding board member of the statewide food salvaging and distribution nonprofit called Harvest Hope Food Bank. Susan is retired in 2017 after 15 years as director of the South Carolina Respite Coalition. which if folks aren't familiar, I had to Google it myself. Respite is a kind of care for care providers. So definitely a through line there. She was elected to the board of the Oregon Memorial Association in the fall of that year and is coming to us again with the Oregon Memorial Association. So without further ado, Susan Robinson.
Thank you for inviting me. When Matthew first contacted us, I thought, well, this is not a topic that fits the Oregon Memorial Association. But as I sit here listening to Khye and as in our preparation for this, I realized, I mean, I am here in Oregon at the request, at the imploring of my son and daughter-in-law, in part because before the pandemic, my son would travel, 3 weeks out of every month. He would be gone a couple or 3 days. And Rebecca has, my daughter-in-law has her own business in bicycle and traffic safety planning, and was managing alone with the two little children. And they were desperately they really needed a housekeeper and helper. But of my 3 children, this son also seems to need, having moved 3,000 miles away from his from his birthplace, seems to really want to have extended family here. And so they searched for a house where they could have an apartment for me. And we've built one in the basement from which I'm broadcasting in Portland, Oregon. But they really have a plan to take care of me when I can't take care of myself. And we don't talk a lot about that, but that is something that as a gerontologist, I'd be a fool not to know about and think about myself, is who are the people that I can count on. Anyway, so it's kind of ironic that I'm here doing exactly what we've been talking about, trying to help a family take care of 2 grandchildren, and it's enriching me. And an old-fashioned idea of extended family living in one house. But I initially was thinking, well, the Oregon Memorial Association is not really a social co-op, and yet it fits in the sense that it is managed by members, for members, and for the public because of what the members care about. We began, it's an old organization, we began 61 years ago, and it came out of a few people, well, a lawyer in Portland was very troubled that a person that worked with him could not afford to bury her husband when he died. And because he was a lawyer and thought he would have influence, he marched down to the funeral home and was very frustrated that he could not persuade the mortuary owners to drop the price and get a better price. So he didn't want this employee to go into debt and be unable to bury her husband and have the closure that she needed. And so he paid for it, but he got some people together and started this organization basically around the issue of affordability of burial practices. Since then, that same group went on to influence the legislature to adopt the Death with Dignity legislation that Oregon has led the way. And the organization continued to work closely for the next 30 or more years with a locally owned mortuary chain up and down Washington and Oregon that would give significant discounted mortuary services, burial services, and cremation services to the members of OMA. And at that time, it was incorporated as a C4, a 501c4, which serves its members. But gradually, they reached out to serve the public in education, and the whole death care industry changed dramatically as we have seen in so many of our systems, the local mortuaries have more and more been bought out by a couple of large corporations that have shareholders and CEOs paid a lot more money than the local morticians. And so our ability to really get discounts, and we were blocked by those large corporations who didn't want to work with us. And I want to say this, that we are not opposed to mortuaries. We know that most Americans don't know nor want to bury their own dead. Although I will tell you, it is an option in most states. We are encountering and working with death doulas in some instances, people who help families who really don't know what to do, but think back on the old days when we didn't embalm people and we washed our own loved ones and dressed them and prepared them for the final disposition of their bodies. And we did that lovingly, and it was therapeutic. More importantly, we've realized that the distancing from birth, the distancing from death, has not helped us to manage it any better. So these things have changed in the death care industry and affected the work of the Oregon Memorial Association. Anyway, at its peak, the Memorial Association had 15,000 members across the state. We now still have about 7,500, and we are still able to arrange discounts for those who join and can produce their membership card. But we have turned increasingly to teaching consumer rights and working with the public on issues that have, since the organization was founded, we've the whole advanced directives, the whole issue of durable power of attorney and healthcare powers of attorney. And we now teach a course which was created by one of our members, very Oregon specific, but it's a course called All's Well That Ends Well. And the emphasis in that course is not just about all the documents that you need to prepare for end-of-life planning or listing the hymns you want at your funeral or what you want done with your body when you die, but the idea that you need a team of people around you to make sure that your care is what you want and that your life is not prolonged if you don't want it prolonged under certain circumstances. And in my experience in aging, one of the great fears people have is that for all the writing down of their advanced directives and what they want, if they are no longer able to manage their own care, that none of their instructions are going to be carried out because they get in the clutches of medical people who are afraid to be sued, who are afraid not to do the most that they can. And medical professionals are in a hard place, saving babies' lives that may not have been able to live at one time. There are real ethical dilemmas for medical people, but we teach anyway about advanced directives. In my career, I did want to, I don't know if Matthew, did you get the slides that I made some lists of some other resources? It's been a while. Yes. I've been retired several years and I'm not really current with all the latest developments in aging, but I will say that as to the older population, that we've already alluded to the idea that there's just not enough people to take care of all the elders. People have had fewer children. We're farther away from our children, and we need two incomes. So those children are busy. We can't rely on that network of free women at home doing all the caregiving. And we've said that the profession is not respected enough, not well paid enough. The nation people don't realize that in skilled care facilities, Medicaid is the source of funding that pays for most skilled care. People think, oh, I'll go to a nursing home and be cared for on my Medicare money. And all people over 65 can get Medicare, and many people on disabilities have Medicare. But it is Medicaid that there are two streams of funding, and the funding that pays for skilled care pays so little that nursing homes barely can afford to accept Medicaid patients. So we, as a nation, we've got to deal with that, the reimbursement for care. But I wanted to especially point out, and these resources, maybe if the slides can be shared with people that want them, I don't know how useful or how much people would go into this, but Bill Thomas is one of a number of champions for reforming nursing home care and providing alternative care to large institutions, more home-like settings for people to be cared for when they need 24-hour care. And I don't think it's one of his best presentations, but the presentation that I've listed, Bill Thomas, on social capital, is a powerful little short commentary on his upbringing in a very rich family, because they cared for each other, and the relationships and caring for elders and respecting the elders in the family was a paramount value of the family. And we've lost that, he claims, in relying on huge institutions and unhome-like settings. Anyway, I don't have time to talk very much about the aging resources that I've listed, but I happened to, while I was looking up a few of these and getting the links for you, I happened to see that on PBS last night was this whole series of the changing nature of work. And so I listed that as a resource because I do think that people want more meaning in their work. And some of my heroes are people that have realized they don't need a CEO of the company. They need to invest in the people that work with them, that are creating their company, and paying them a decent basic wage is the least of what they can do. Some of these corporate owners and investors have actually had the wisdom to give ownership to their employees so that they develop the capital as well as making a wage. And I think they serve as there are not too many of them, but they serve as a model for how we want to build corporations, that bilking the company and taking capital away. I mean, in the mortuary business, there are local morticians who will confide in us and say, you know, I grew up in the mortuary and our family always owned it. And I feel this is a personal mission of people that come to us in a crisis time, so bereft when they've just lost a loved one. And yet now that we're owned by the big corporation, I got to sell so many top of the line caskets. And I wish I didn't have to do that, because I can see that families are stretching and going into debt to do what they want in death care. And it's because of the stockholders and the capitalist model that these large corporations are working on. Anyway, I will, I have barely touched on the aging resources, but if you take time, I did want to, I'm sure there are other foundations working on this, but Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has led the way in giving tiny little grants that have provided the seed for Alzheimer's care in particular, but day care programs that have helped caregivers day by day, to be able to be employed, but have their loved ones in adult programming. And the ARC in Somerville, South Carolina is a great model. But I would note that the ARC is an example of systems that have really thrived because of the drive of one or two dedicated people. And Peg Laymeyer, who has herself experienced taking care of her mother with dementia and is the backbone, really, the driving force of that adult day program that has I think it's 20 years old now or more. But what happens when an individual like Peg retires? Will we have the people in place to sustain it? These are questions. And will they be able to make a living enough? These are the questions we're asking today, I think. Anyway, I'll stop now. Those resources will be links that you could explore if you wanted to. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Susan. And we've been showing those slides and we'll be sharing them out as well. So folks will have a chance to access those. So thank you for gathering those for us. And yeah, thank you for your presentation. So some of the things that I heard in sort of what you were sharing, Susan, related to sort of our topic here, that the Oregon Memorial Association, really the OMA began in the affordable funereal services, right? And then has also moved into some bigger picture conversations as well, influencing things like public policy in the areas of like death with dignity, for example. But that's something you all also took on. And over time, you've kind of moved a little bit maybe away from sort of the bread and butter of affordable funeral services toward becoming more of this educational organization, right? Educating consumers about not only like affordability with relation to death, but also the humanizing of the process, it sounds like, and what are the options that people have if, depending on what their choices are, right? If they wish to bury at home, or if they wish to go with maybe a more green option, such as like a composting or other types of more, sort of less chemical intensive options than the traditional embalming or cremation, and just breaking up that sort of, you don't have an option thinking, right? That people get so kind of directed into. And so you're there as an educational resource and trusted partner. As you kind of said, Susan, I really love this about, that people are in such a bereft time of their lives, such vulnerability, we've already dealt with in terms of the passing of a loved one. And there we are suddenly confronted with someone whose responsibility on the other side of that not only is to be a caring partner with maybe a mortuary, but also has to upsell us. And like, what are the incentives to a system that then directs that person who's there to help us to also have to sell to us and upsell to us, in fact? And what are the incentives that kind of drive that behavior? You touched on also the idea of employee ownership as one of the ways that we can help to hopefully kind of countervail that force. And so I think, so Rebecca and I will now kind of transition a little bit with us to what is the social co-op, and like, how does it kind of fit into some of what we've seen here, and what might be some of that promise for the future?
Yeah. And I think the through thread, Matthew, as you've mentioned, and we heard from Susan and from Ty, I think, and we'll touch on this in a little bit, really comes down to this fundamental question of dignity. How and in what ways can we reconfigure the delivery of these services in a way that recenters dignity, the dignity of the persons receiving those services, and the dignity of those people providing those services, right? Understanding, and we'll get a little bit more into this when we talk about social co-ops in particular, but understanding that we as people, people as protagonists, right? There are so many ways in which these systems and the current configuration of these organizational forms that make us feel and kind of render us within this dependency space as clients or as patients versus becoming active members in the decision-making process, active co-creators of how and in what ways these organizational forms, et cetera, can provide care, again, with dignity, with solidarity, with attention to building and spreading relational webs of connection, of compassion. And I think for me, that really provides the foundation and the real potential promise. And it's not just an idea. As we know, there are long-standing examples of how people have been doing this with respect to social co-ops. So Matthew, I'll turn it over to you to get into that for a little bit more detail, and then we'll hear from our guest as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca. Yeah, so the idea of the social co-op and some of a sketch perhaps of what is this sort of historical and cultural context around what is this concept. So the social co-op we typically think of as emerging from the early 1980s in northern Italy. There's a particular province called Bologna and a city called Emilia-Romagna, which is often just sort of treated hand in hand as like, oh, that's where the social co-ops are in many co-op spaces. And so what is the kind of focus of these types of cooperatives? So they're, in many ways, they're focused on social care of all types, elder care, child care, but also disabled care, or often actually frequently rehabilitative care. So people who have experienced addiction or other types of, maybe like neurodivergent kind of mental health challenges, things we might call like, difficult to employ kind of conditions that people experience for themselves, so they can have a rehabilitative experience through working with a social cooperative. And because we're using the word co-op, it's always worth underscoring that like we are talking about co-ops here, right? So as we think of them, it shares many of the common features of what co-ops mean here, also in the US. So we're talking about entities, firms really, that have a sense of shared ownership. So we've got stakeholders who engage in the ownership and control of the entity itself. There's democratic governance by the members, but there's an interesting twist in which there's an emphasis on the multi-stakeholding aspect of that, right? So we've got people are interacting in different ways. We've talked here more so about the providers of care. What about also the recipients of care, as well as maybe this larger circle of the sense of what is a community that surrounds a cooperative. So actually inviting community members to take an ownership stake in their social cooperative, bringing in the clients, but also the families of those who are being served also typically have a chance to become members in social cooperatives. In terms of what sort of access that they have to funding, there's often, sort of a mixing between what is available in the market. So patient capital sources, patient capital providers, such as, CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions, kind of social purpose banks. You might think of CDFIs if you're not familiar, but also cooperative banks that are more so attuned to the needs of cooperatives. They have an interesting relationship to the state. And, John Restakis' work talks a lot about what is that relationship and what does it mean to civilize the state? And we'll be hearing more from John about what that is. But there is an interesting sense in which the government takes on a mandate to also support this and kind of provide its part in the care provision in society, that they're helping to provide material, whether it's direct like revolving loan funds, or if it's preferable taxation or reduced taxation, those types of enabling instruments that the government practices with the social co-ops to make them more successful. They use a process of co-production of services. So this empowers the clients, and it is also improving up the quality. The co-production is a sense of, it's not just, a care provider who's the, sole provider of the relationship. It's a very bi-directional, right? It's a very mutual exchange, not only of those who receive services, but also who provide it. And that's kind of an essential sense of how that happens, and also as part of the way that it can be less expensive than some of the more bureaucratic models that we employ, which just assume sort of a professional caregiver who handles everything, right? Mostly in terms of the scale of these, in terms of like how many worker owners we're typically talking about, often the social co-ops have fewer than 30 worker owners and less than 100 other stakeholder members. So that's, right around 150 people maximum who might be engaged in each of these. So these are very much like locally rooted, smaller firms who are kind of engaging in the social co-op work. They also partner with other co-ops locally for shared back office services. So some of the things that all of them need together, right? What is it they can do together, such as providing training services to one another, engaging in joint purchasing activities, human resources, bookkeeping, these types of back-end services that often, we form secondary cooperatives in the United States to help provide. They're doing the same, more or less, and with the social co-ops in places like Emilia-Romagna. They're making use of tech, so technology is certainly not an afterthought. They're often using, getting to be more sophisticated scheduling technologies to be able to deliver services in a timely manner to those who need it. EMR, electronic medical record systems, to keep track of their patients. They're innovating in terms of, care tech, so to speak. They're also using volunteer labor. That's that kind of like co-production that I mentioned before, as well as a social currency to lower costs. And this is a sense of, John Restakis' example of the Furiai Kipu in Japan as like a time banking system, right? So a lot of that kind of informal exchange of cooperative services so that people can get the needs that they have at lower costs because they're able to directly interface with each other. They're also part of a culture of social solidarity and cooperativism that extends back, certainly since at least World War II, probably earlier, just part of the sort of social milieu of the region. And definitely the cooperative experience has emerged out of that, sort of the social solidarity that is more common to that region. Each co-op usually also takes on a solidarity obligation in a few different ways. So some of the joint responsibilities that social co-ops take on, they actually put funds directly toward the formation of new cooperatives. So they're taking pieces of their own profits and they feed them into a fund, which is then used to help create new cooperatives. They also do the same in a very similar function to the secondary federations. So they're the ones also helping to seed that secondary role, that the back-end services that they all need and share it together. Each social co-op is kind of taking on a bit of that. And we see this not only in Emilia-Romagna, but we also see it in Quebec, we see it in Canada, we see it across Latin America. So I don't want to make it sound as though like we don't see these types of cooperatives anywhere else in the world, but there's just a very rich documentation of the history of social co-ops in Emilia-Romagna. And with that, Rebecca, that's good. I think you've got a few other remarks to share.
Yes, I underscore everything Matthew said. And I think it's important to remember, for example, with Cooperative Healthcare Associates in New York City, arguably one of, if not the largest worker-owned cooperative in the United States. Right. One of the founders of that organization, Rick Serpin, talks about the reason why they chose the cooperative model was because they were very cognizant of the fact that they were, and several people in the chat have mentioned this, they were in a sector that is known for very low profit margins. Right? And they knew that the only way they could prioritize the wages, the benefits, the labor conditions of their owner members was to form in this kind of a social co-op model. And I think that that's something that many of you are commenting on in the chat, and many of us are really drawn to, again, these questions again of dignity, of recentering the ways in which we are interdependent, right? But we can't expect that, Khye and her work is going to, that is not sustainable for them individually, or for our society with respect to the rising care demands. Right? We see more people, and if COVID has done anything, it has pulled off the very thin veil as it relates to the precarity with respect to care, etc. So I wanted to just say that form has one that enables individuals and sectors, and it also raises questions of, do we want an organizational form that prioritizes profit maximization to come together with respect to the provision of care? Because if we know anything about those processes, we're going to reduce costs in one or two ways. It's going to impact quality, or it's going to impact labor costs, right? So again, this idea that this model is a structural form that allows us to be able to do that. And so with that said, Matthew, I'll give it back to you.
All right, great. So I think at this point, Elias, we'll switch over to commentary and feedback from our guest speakers, correct? Yep. All right, so we would love to open the floor. So not only we can open this also for a bit of Q&A, but we would love for some of our guests to weigh into some of these conversations. So we mentioned John Restakis, who's with us and is quite an intellectual contributor to this conversation. We also have Michael Lewis, who's also a fellow contributor with John. And I would also like to invite Margaret Bao, who I was very pleased to see has joined us and has just a very deep experience also with childcare cooperatives, as I know, and care and the provision of care through cooperatives. So if it would be all right, I'd love the three of you to maybe offer some remarks of what's on your mind or what's on your heart for this conversation. And maybe we can go in that order if that works. So we can go from John, Michael to Margaret.
Sure. Thank you, Matthew. And thanks everybody else for being part of this discussion. God, I don't know where to begin. There's so many issues here. that have bubbled up around the issue of social care. I wanted to reflect a couple of thoughts on some key points that came to my mind, both in Khye's presentation and in Susan's. Khye, I think, really laid out very powerfully the kind of dysfunction that caregivers are having to contend with in the current environment. I mean, the isolation, the lack of connectivity between caregivers, the precarity of their work, and so on. And it reminded me too of so many other forms of care, home care providers, child care provision, and so on. These other forms of care have a history of organizational support for their provision, but doulas, of course, don't, I think, benefit from that kind of backup history. So that sense of isolation and disconnection and burnout was very powerfully described by Khye in her presentation. But I guess the point that I wanted to reflect on with respect to that is that all of this is really a function of the way in which our political economy has been set up. The fact that the only kind of value that's really recognized and rewarded is the kind of value that provides profit for private investors. And so this has colonized all forms of life, not only productive work life, but also our social life and the way we care for each other. So the key issue here underlying all of what we're talking about, of course, is what is the nature of care, and how does the actual quality of care relate to the current political setup, this kind of profit maximizing capitalist model that privatizes and commercializes all kinds of social relationships, including care relationships. So what I think we have to be asking ourselves is, once we understand that the fundamentals of care is actually a caring relationship between people, an exchange of a certain quality of human interaction, then we understand immediately that the transactional nature of commercialization and privatization violates the very heart of care. And so what we have to be asking ourselves is, what is the form of economy that actually makes social care humane and dignified in the way that has been raised? And so that brings us then to the question of the social economy, of cooperative forms of care, social co-ops, and so on. These are all systemic questions. And when we're looking at how we respond to this organizationally, it's far more, I believe, than simply providing people with information and workshops and educational tools to make, appropriate choices for their situation. Although that is absolutely fundamental, we have to move to the next level, which is to say, what are the systems we need to build? And what are the kind of public policies that need to be lobbied for in order for these systems to develop and survive? And so, as Matthew has pointed out, the evolution of social cooperatives and the way they systematize how they provide social care to their members and to the community is a really important place to begin to look at how that model actually evolved. And what are the kind of public policies? What are the kind of tax policies? What is the role of the municipality? How does the municipality and local government interact and cooperate with these social co-ops and their wider organizations to sustain that model? Those, I think, are the kinds of things that need to come front and center when we start thinking about humane and dignified forms of social care. I do want to just offer a couple of recommendations from the presentation. Susan spoke very eloquently about her work around the Memorial Association. I'd like to raise a couple of suggestions in terms of cooperative models for funeral services. Quebec is the source of some very successful funeral co-ops that have in fact been able to lower the costs of funeral services to their members. And they do that fundamentally by operating their own funeral enterprises, cooperative funeral services for their members, which lower costs for everything from the price of caskets to burial fees and all the rest of it. So certainly look to Quebec and the funeral co-ops in Quebec as a model to learn from. And she also raised the question of elder care, senior care. And I would suggest that one place to look at a variety of models that provide elder care using the cooperative structure is a report that I wrote in 2006 called Elder Care Co-ops in Canada, or Co-op Elder Care in Canada. And for those of you that are interested in that, if you can contact me, I'd be very happy to provide you a copy of the report, which will give you a range of possible cooperative models that address the question of elder care. I'll just close by noting how crucial this whole question is, and how crucial both the social economy and the cooperative movement are to generating a pathway to developing new systems and new institutions for caregiving that rely on this fundamental question of cultivating humane, caring relations between individuals, personal relations between people, and the kinds of organizations that honor that and cultivate that. That means that organizationally, strategically, we need to be thinking about two levels of action or two pathways of action. One is local, and the kind of organizing work that people like Khye are doing within, your own community of coworkers and your geographic community, and how that connects to a local municipality and people at the local municipal level, also in government or even at the state level, that may have a supporting interest in looking at these kinds of alternatives. And the other level is the level of public policy. And that's a longer term struggle. That's a political struggle around advocating for and lobbying for and finding politicians and candidates for public office that actually understand the kinds of public policies that need to be promoted if the question of social care is going to be addressed in the way we've been describing. So lobbying, public policy at a governmental level, and then strategies at a local community level in the local municipality. I'll just leave it at that. I'm sure other people have their own ideas to contribute to that, but there's so much more to talk about here. We're just sort of scratching the surface, but thanks for the opportunity to chime in.
And over to you, Michael. Thank you so much, John.
I'm walking around where my daughter lives. Yeah, I learned a lot about social cooperatives from John, who I've known for a long time, and from people in Quebec. But what I really has impressed me, so to talk personally about that experience, is number one, it started in the 60s with one community who were fed up with the system, a little community in northern Italy. Secondly, the multi-stakeholder model that they built was what came out of their critique of the poor quality of government-led and delivered services within a bureaucratized context. Thirdly, they said they had no power as families or any equity in the relationship between professionals and the quality of care. And so this multi-stakeholder model, I think, is a key to this social co-op model. And it's not like a normal co-op. I just want to reinforce what was said earlier by sorry, haven't got all the names. But one of the facilitators. You're opposite. You, yes.
Matthew, no worries.
Matthew, sorry about that, Matthew. Anyway, the fact that workers and families and professionals have membership on an equitable basis and no more than 100 to 150 members in any social co-op. That structure in and of itself, what it does is provides a manageable and potential for cohesiveness and community building and strengthening through the co-op structure. And that shows up in the quality of care. The other piece, that John's already mentioned, but I just want to say a little bit about the story there, because it started in the 65 or 66 with one co-op, and then they went to another, and then slowly, because it had a link to the broader co-op movement partly as well, and they were beginning to spread all through that northern Italy, they built a movement. Took 20 years, but they got national legislation. And that national legislation absolutely embedded the qualities of that care in terms of how the structure and the payment for services emerged. And in the social co-op context, I mean, John mentioned, and you've all mentioned, there's a number of different ways in which particular subsectors of care may be organized, but they organize around a number of other sectors related to basic needs as well. And so in terms of addiction services, it's resident, they got a residential, those people are getting training as well as addiction services. They're living in a residential context and they're building quality skills and producing products that help pay for the services as well as give them bridges into integration in whatever ways are available to them with those skills. So that to me is a really interesting model. And then like in the food production area, right? I mean, there are people who are coming from immigrants into Italy, not immigrants, they're coming as refugees often. And the way in which this model has been used to create a bulwark in an area of Eastern Italy where the mafia controls a lot. It's amazing what they've been able to do. So anyway, I just wanted to say that those are the kinds of things that have kind of drawn me into this discussion. Certainly, my own daughters, I got a number of daughters are all involved in social care in one way or another, including one that's a deaf doula. So I was very interested in Khye's comments about birthing doulas, of which two of my daughters had access to when they were delivering their children. So anyway, that's all I have to say. I just wanted to accent the model a little bit more so people can see the kind of, not only the direct care impacts, but that the impacts in community building more generally is really important. Thank you. Great to be here.
All right. So from M to M, from Michael to Margaret.
Thank you for calling out. And I just have to give a shout out to John that I was able to go with him on a trip back in 2003 that spent a week in Vancouver and then 3 weeks in Bologna, Italy, looking at the co-ops. And that was so formative to what I've done and what my thinking since then. So I just want to give that shout out to the good Canadians that organized that. I want to say that we have learned, the collective we have learned so much, and there's been so much experimentation in the last 20, 30 years that I think it would be helpful to take a look at a parallel cooperative movement that came about leading up to 1935, when the rural electric cooperatives came into existence in the United States. You think about it, that urban areas had access to electricity thanks to the investor-owned utilities, the IOUs, but they refused to provide electricity to rural areas. It wasn't cost effective. They couldn't make a profit off of that. So urban areas had electricity 20, 30 years before rural America was still in the dark. And so in the depths of the Great Depression, the FDR administration, the Roosevelt administration, had a lot of pressure on it, get us electricity. And so the Roosevelt administration created the REA, the Rural Electrification Administration, and they went to, in 1935, and they went to these investor-owned utilities and said, hey, we'll give you really low interest loans, go ahead and do it. And those IOUs thwarted the efforts to do that. They tried to disrupt that. And so it was the Indiana Farmers Bureau that came forward and said, hey, there's this model called the cooperative. Give us the funds, those low interest funds that you're going to give to the investor-owned utilities. But it's not enough just to write out a blank check to, this check. We also need assistance with forming a network of organizers to go out into the rural communities to help form little electric co-ops. But then we also need the technical advice from engineers, because you're working with electricity, you want to blow things up. So it was this system of the very low interest loans, plus the technical assistance, paying for the technical assistance to go out and help organize people. And from 1935 until 1950, 95% of rural America finally got electricity that the investor-owned system wouldn't provide in the 20, 30 years before that. I think we have a parallel that we that are thinking about this, we that want to see the humanity in this, we can say, the investor system, the private equity firms, they are failing us in the provision of care, childcare, elder care, whatever type of care. We've got a better system, but we're going to need some resources to make it happen. So thank you for letting me get on my soapbox.
I just want to follow up the remark you made, Margaret, about the role of the state and how crucial it was that the roles of the administration was open, to the strategy of local cooperative control for electrifying rural America. Recently, I've been thinking a lot and writing a fair bit about the role of the state and how crucial it is. And in particular, in this area, this sector of social care, how strategic that sector is, and how organizing a strategy that focuses on the provision of social care in a way that actually responds to the actual needs of people. And that's not just, elder care and other forms of disability and so on like that, but, healthcare, for example, which is still a burning issue in the United States. I write at length about this in my current volume, Civilizing the State, which I hope you have a chance to look at, only because what I try and focus on there is how, even if the social economy and the kinds of models that we're talking about here, social co-ops and so on, were to become a broad-based movement and provide far broader access to kind of locally controlled, user-controlled social care, that is only a partial solution. Because what we also have to understand is that a model that still depends on market dynamics, a model that still depends either on government infusions of public money, or a model that depends on private infusions of charitable money, is still not a sustainable model. We have to be thinking about other forms of market, which actually correspond to the needs and values of social care organizations and social care itself, which means a kind of social market. Now, I don't want to go into detail on this now, but I'm raising that only to say that even in a place like Emilia-Romagna, where you have a very extensive and relatively very successful social co-op infrastructure, it is still very dependent on public policy, on the kind of political ideology that's currently in power in government. It's in a sense subject to the whims and the way the political winds blow, whether they're going to get continued support from the local municipality to offer them contracts to provide elder care or not. And so we also need to be thinking, I think, of developing alternative forms of markets that actually do not depend on generating the kind of profits and generating the kind of market mentalities and practices that are actually just borrowed from the capitalist commercial sector. That's where I wanted to end up on that comment, because we need to think strategically about the kind of economics that will sustain the kind of locally controlled social co-ops that we're sort of advocating as a possible solution here.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, so I put out to the group that we can kind of end either on more of a Q&A with the group, staying kind of as it is, or breakout groups for folks to have smaller group conversations. I've seen mostly votes for Q&A so far, and I know we've had lots of great Q&A questions coming through the chat. So if folks are okay, I think we'll stay with the group Q&A. All right, I see another vote coming in that way. And Elizabeth, I know you'd seen a few great questions coming in. I don't know, did you have a chance to maybe kind of distill one that you wanted to maybe lift up?
It did, yeah. I think there were a few that were coming in, trying to hone in on the specificity of some of the models that we're looking into. So one around, Margaret referencing rural, the rural experience and what is the applicability or transferability of that to the care space. And then I think in general, John, others who are speaking to social co-ops as a potential path forward, how do we know that these are working in the context of the care space, and how would we be defining what that means, right? Like, what does it mean, the measures by which we would say something is or isn't working?
Right. Well, there's been a lot of research done on social co-ops. I mean, there's any number of reports that have been produced, especially by EURICSA, EURICSE, which is a cooperative and social economy research institute in Italy. So EURICSA has done a lot of analysis of social co-ops on their relative success vis-a-vis the public model of care on the one hand, and privatized for-profit models of social care on the other. The metrics around what constitutes a successful form of care delivery are, this is also fascinating, because one of the achievements of the social co-op movement in Italy was actually to negotiate what successful care actually looks like. How do you actually measure the quality of care beyond simply its cost efficiency and its ability to generate the covering of costs and generate a profit. And there's a whole sort of listing of quality measures to identify when a social co-op or any form of social care is actually meeting the quality standards of humane and appropriate care. In general, I would say that the evidence points to lower costs for the provision of the care. That's partly because a fair amount of the work that is contributed to social co-ops is by volunteers. And so that subsidizes the cost of the care. And the fact that social co-ops also have a differential cost structure that allows people that have less means to provide the cost of the care can be subsidized by families that are more able to pay a higher cost for the care that they receive. And so you get this cross-subsidization that allows better access to care for recipients of social co-ops. The last thing I would add to that is that when social co-ops were first being organized, there was a fear that they would end up displacing the jobs of public sector workers. And there was a long and quite testy debate between unionized public service workers in Italy and the social co-op movement. It turns out, in fact, that what social co-ops were able to do was not so much displace public services, but rather open up avenues for new forms of social care that were not being provided by the public model. And so there wasn't a sort of a migration or a displacement of public service employees because of social co-ops. Rather, there was an addition of a whole cadre of new forms of employment, providing new kinds of social care that were not already provided by the public system or the private system. So those are some indicators of the degree to which social co-ops have been successful in Italy. There are issues. I mentioned one of them being their dependence on public money and on public contracts, which is an ongoing challenge for the model. And the other question that has arisen is that social co-ops, even though they are quite localized in many ways, they've also amalgamated into larger and larger formations. So consortia of social co-ops that actually cover large territories in order to bid for public contracts that require a large capacity to deliver services. And so the model has evolved from simply social small scale to larger scale organizations. And I've heard complaints that as the cooperatives amalgamate and create these large consortia to be able to deliver these services, they also have tended to become less connected to local members and becoming more bureaucratized as they do so. So that's a challenge, an organizational challenge around scale that social co-ops are having to deal with in Italy now.
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, folks, feel free to raise your hand or come off mute if you have a question.
Could I ask a plain old question?
Please.
Okay. Anybody have any idea why the cooperative home care associates model has not gone totally viral all over the United States? It seems like such an obvious sort of thing to do.
If you don't mind, I'll try taking that one. I helped form the first rural home care worker co-op inspired by cooperative home care associates. And now we're up to about 15 across the country. Unfortunately, 75% of care for people with elders and people with disabilities is coming from Medicaid, not Medicare, Medicaid. Only about 10% is paid out of pocket. And so the reimbursement system in the United States is so stagnated. You can't make agencies work. It's really difficult work.
Yeah,
it's
and
a funding issue.
And that speaks to the problem of dependence on public money, on government programs and so on. That's kind of a reflection of that fact. I mean, by saying that, I'm not advocating that the state and the government and public programs shouldn't have a role to play. What I'm speaking to is the fragility or the vulnerability of the model that stakes its future on that alone, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, people don't have personal savings to pay for it out of pocket. It needs a different system of making the care available.
But I'm just interested, John, and for everybody here, if we're talking about the fragility, both of these 2 or 3 different models, what are the mechanisms by which it becomes more firmly embedded into a local ecosystem? I'm thinking of the Cleveland model, where we look to anchor institutions to funnel that money, these institutions, right? And I hear it's Margaret's, not right? I see some feelings about that, but what are the alternative frameworks, and are they being tried and tested?
Yeah. one area I think, and this has also been, I mean, it's played a role in Italy, is the use of social capital, social, not capital in terms of relations, but social actual financial capital, cooperative financial institutions, credit unions, and so on, that are locally organized and who have a mission to promote and support the social economy and the cooperative movement. Well, this is a banking system basically that raises capital, privately through the population or the community or investors, and they have a particular mission and purpose to support the organization of things like social cooperatives or cooperative enterprises. You have in the United States, a fairly robust credit union movement, but it is not organized to funnel, cooperative capital into social enterprises or into social co-ops. That is one possible source, theoretically, of capital to help finance both the organization and the training and this, the sustenance of social enterprises, social co-ops. But there you have a challenge around organizational culture, around a business ethos that is very pervasive in American credit unions, and not only American credit unions, in many Canadian credit unions as well. And so that's a potential pool or a model for raising social financing for things like social co-ops that is simply never lifted off the ground in the United States. And then I believe that if you look at a couple of the models that I describe in Civilizing the State, there are other ways of generating services that aren't entirely dependent on capital. For example, the point that Matthew raised around Fure Kipu, which is a huge time banking system that provides care for elders in Japan. That's been very successful. There's hundreds of thousands of members. And that has been based around the solidarity of people working in the local community and sharing voluntary services to their neighboring, elder, and then the time that they spend providing that voluntary support to that individual is banked in the time banking system that they can then cash in either for themselves or other members of their family when they need it. So that's a very sophisticated form of a social market, but it is a model that is worth, I think, really learning from and expanding. That is not based on simply getting investors to put capital into the system.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, John. I'm very mindful and respectful of people's time. I know that it is 1:34. I know that I see Chris's hand is up. I don't know, Chris, if you want to ask a quick question, then we'll move to close with Elias. This really, we could have, a week retreat somewhere, and maybe we should on this. So, but in the spirit of being respectful of everyone's time, I did want to try to bring us to a close. But Chris, I would welcome your question or thoughts or reflections.
I'll quickly ask the question, but I'm from Manitoba, Winnipeg, Canada. So,
Okay.
But what's the difference between a health co-op versus a social enterprise that does health services? Is there a difference, or is that the exact same model?
Well, I can just quickly respond to that. It's in the organizational structure. If the social enterprise is organized on the basis of a membership that has control rights, in other words, the members have collective ownership over that enterprise and they have each an equal vote in the decisions that are made, it's basically operating as a co-op, even if it's not incorporated as such. So the difference is its organizational structure and the degree to which the members have user control over the decisions in that organization. A health co-op requires that is the structure. It's a democratically controlled membership organization, whereas social enterprises don't have to be.
Thank you. Matthew, I don't know if you have any final words, but I think we'll quickly move to Elias here. Matthew?
Mostly just, yeah, gratitude for the conversation.
Yes,
I am
yeah.
so grateful to be here and be in
Yeah.
community with you all, and love what we've heard, and love to look forward to like what it is that
Absolutely.
comes next. So
Absolutely. And then again, a warm extension of gratitude to Khye for their contributions, and to Susan for your contributions. You've enriched this conversation, and I'm sure that there will be people following up with you to continue this conversation. I've seen many people making comments in the chat and wanting to kind of foster this relationship building as we continue with this work individually and collectively in solidarity. So Elias, oh, sorry, John.
For Elias, I just wanted to note to people that in the fall, in September, there is going to be a webinar. I'm taking part in that on elder care co-ops in Canada. So for some of you that may be interested in that, I can share that information with Elias when it is confirmed, the date, and then he can get it out to all the rest of you. And I'm sure you'd be welcome to join in that session.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. This was just dizzying. Great stuff. It is recorded, as you can see. We'll be following up with links to the recording. We'll also throw in a copy of the chat. And also, I want to mention in September, date to be determined, we're going to have John back and have a conversation about another aspect of this we've talked about a little bit, enabling good work. And the ideas in his book, Civilizing the State, and what would that mean in terms of policy and regulation and all kinds of good stuff like that. So there's one more webinar to come on this topic. So watch for the email on that. And thanks, everybody, for a great conversation.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, everyone.